Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 479, featuring Nikola Todorovic, who is the co-founder and CEO of Wonder Dynamics, a really interesting company that was founded a few years ago, back with Tye Sheridan, who is the co-founder, and they've been making the news recently. Obviously, a lot of people were interested in them because they're a very interesting AI company, which we'll get into in a little bit. But they also got acquired by Autodesk more recently, which is also very interesting, and we get into some of that. Nikola was actually an artist, and he worked at many studios and worked as a VFX person for a long time, and sort of thought about the process of what artists go through to do things, and it was a really interesting thing. And if you sort of look at what the foundation of what Wonder Dynamics is started on, it's really started with a very simple problem. What are all the steps that are needed to put a CG character into a plate? And that's kind of a very common problem. And they solve it with multiple layers of AI that have been developed along the way to sort of create this workflow. And they specifically tell you a little bit about the workflow and what it's like. It includes all the motion capture, camera capture, creating a clean plate, developing a scene, all of those things that are in there. So really, really interesting to sort of think about that process and what goes into that, and all the different layers of AI that are necessary to do that. We obviously talk a lot about, especially someone who started an AI company, who's dealing with the expense of an AI company, to sort of think about all of those things that are in there and how to sort of motivate that. And obviously, we talk a lot about the ethics of AI and how they address some of those issues as well. So really cool to talk to him, a really great guy. And honestly speaking, someone who I have a feeling we're going to talk to a lot more, because he's really gets it, to be honest. He really understands the artist's perspective on the whole process. Okay, we've got a couple of announcements on products, some big ones actually. So if you want to know more about these, just go to chaos.com. The first one I want to talk about is Vantage of 2 Update 5. Yes, Vantage continues to have lots of updates, which is incredible. It seems like we just had Update 4 not long ago, but with Update 5, we've added VR support with OpenXR. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. A really cool big feature. We've also added animated vegetation, specifically with our Cosmos assets, that you can add in animated vegetation, which is fully ray traced as well. Pretty cool. So you go check that out. We've also added rounded corners as a shader, a support in there, and many more features, including lots of interface features and even ACES CG support, which is really great. Another announcement I want to let you guys know about is Corona 12. Super excited about Corona 12 being updated. And one of the big things there is, guess what? It can export to Vantage. So yes, now your Vantage workflow is going to work with a lot of our Chaos products, including Corona. And it's really exciting to have that real-time experience with Corona as well. We've also in Corona 12, we've added a new scatter instance brush, curved decals, and done a lot of updates to the frame buffer. So the virtual frame buffer 2 has added a bunch of things, including exporting to our Corona EXR, which are CXR files, which goes straight to our Corona image editor. So lots of cool stuff there, including more Corona pattern improvements, lots of stuff going on. So definitely go check it out. Again, just go to chaos.com for all of our product updates and news about that. Don't have any news in terms of events happening just yet. Follow us. But if you want to know more, just go to chaos.com/events. Again, go to chaos.com/events. I personally have been working on a lot of stuff in the Innovation Lab, which I'm going to be announcing very, very soon in the next month or so. So you guys will be seeing more about that. And it is related to our virtual production projects. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, which is how we're using Vantage inside of virtual production, just go to chaos.com/virtual production. Again, chaos.com/virtual production. If you want to know more about the podcast, just go to chaos.com/CG Garage. That's our podcast page. If you'd like to follow us on Facebook, it is facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. If you'd like to watch this podcast, where you can watch all of our videos, including this, or even the video about Vantage and Corona, just go to youtube.com/chaosgrouptv. Again, youtube.com/chaosgrouptv. If you have any ideas for podcasts and you'd like to suggest them to us, we do listen to a lot of them. We've been getting a lot of great ones, and we do follow up on most of them. You can email us, labs@chaos.com. Again, labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 479 with Nikola Todorovic.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Okay, Nikola, thank you. I'm so excited to have you on. Obviously, there's a lot of very interesting news going on right now about what you guys are doing. Before we get into all of the most current things, let's give a little context to everything and find out a little bit about your background. How did you get into computer graphics, or did you always have an interest in visual effects and movies? Like, where did this all start for you? What was your inspiration in some ways?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I was always interested in film. I wanted to get in film, I wanted to make films since I was probably 8 years old, maybe even
Yeah.
younger. Um, I I was born in Bosnia and I lived in Croatia and Serbia, and then my um my uncle at the time had a video
Hmm.
store, and that region had quite a bit of difficult 90s.
Sure.
So we would go back our summers to Bosnia, and I would stay at my uncle's video store. It was my favorite summer activity, right? So it was an old VHS tapes. I guess the first money I ever made in my life was he let me sit in and cover him one time. I think I was probably 10 years old. I was so nervous. I remember this young couple coming in and ordering. And if you remember back in the day, you had, your display box, but then you have a separate VHS that you kind of put the tapes if you remember,
Yes.
like Blockbusters. So I remember doing that at 10 years old. My hands were shaking so hard because I was so nervous. I'm like, I'm renting some of the movie. Um, but I got really, really interested in film back then, and got really inspired. It was a good escape, right? Growing up a kid in that area, it was a really good escape, and I could, we really couldn't afford a camera or something like that, my family, but I had internet access, and this was early days of internet tutorials, right? And I wanted to make films, and I got websites like Video Copilot,
Hmm.
Andrew Kramer, and others. That was my intro. Probably 11 to 12 years old, I started watching tutorials, kind of learning compositing, and then just learning all about CG and 3D and everything pretty much around visual effects.
So
So
did you have
for
an
me, it was
emphasis
always
for
I
for
want,
for that visual effects part of things? You have size of like the movie magic. Is that what it was about?
yeah, I think for me, I was always drawn to films that were, bigger than what's real,
Right.
right? So films that were enhanced with visual storytelling. So I think sci-fi and genres like
What was
that.
the
So
movie that you probably
visual
watched like
effects,
a million times? You probably had one movie you watched a million times in your uncle's store.
probably at that time, Back to the
Yeah.
Future, I would
Yes.
say. Back to the Future, I probably watched a million times. Yeah, I still
Yeah.
do. Uh, um, but yeah, I think visual effects was just such a uh, interesting thing for me as a kid. It was such a problem
Hmm.
solving, and it was so creative, and you could really do things independently. You didn't need a big crew. You didn't need because as a kid you can't really get production together. It's very different than now. You have a camera on every phone. Back then we didn't,
Hmm.
so it was an intro, and then I kind of self-taught myself how to do it, and I moved to US for college 2009.
Hmm.
And during school, I did an internship with this small boutique, Brickyard Visual Effects out of
Oh
Santa
yeah.
Monica. Yeah, and I started, Steve Michaels ran it at the time, this office here, an amazing boss at the time.
And what were you studying
Um,
in school? Like, what
and I
was the
really,
thing that
yeah,
you were interested in when you were in school?
I was studying film and IT. So I
Okay.
was always a bit interested in that intersection between technology and
Hmm.
film. It came naturally. Um, and yeah, one thing led to another. While I was still in school, I kind of got my first feature credits. Did Started with concept art that turned into compositing for this small indie film called Little
Hmm.
Boy, Kevin James film. Um, yeah, and then one thing led to another. I started freelancing, and then I became a supervisor, and then got involved more and more into technology. And we started Tye, my co-founder, and I started Wonder about 2016.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, that's obviously a big some big jumps there, right? Like how did you sort of get into well, first of all, what inspired you for your company? Like, what were the things that
Hmm.
you wished you had that you were missing that inspired you to do this? And then also, how did you run into Tye, and how did that become a relationship that he's supported
Hmm.
you guys on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, the inspiration really came by, it was a bit selfish at the beginning because we were frustrated. Ty and I were writing at the time
Hmm.
together, and we wanted to make our own sci-fi films and animated films. And um, every time we wrote something, and I always say this, we realized everything we wrote was $100 million film that obviously nobody's going to give you money
Right.
for, right? Especially if you're a first-time filmmaker, you just always have to be considerate of, well, there's no way I'll get budget for
Right.
this, right? And so for us, we got into technology early on. We stumbled upon AI. We were building this interactive experience where you can have a conversation with the characters in the
Hmm.
show. And then this was about 2018, and we used cognitive AI, which is essentially you watch kind of like a courtroom drama, and then a switch happens on your TV, and then you would have a character you can ask
Hmm.
questions. And as we did that, we also used AI to help us a little bit with generation of that scene, and that branching of the narrative. And cognitive AI just wasn't there yet. This was before ChatGPT, all the LLMs. But we were so fascinated by the production aspect and post-production aspect of it. We called it visual AI at the time. There was no term generative AI. And that's really when we started going deep into self-driving cars technology and robotics and really understanding that everything we see through the camera is essentially what these models are being taught of. It's just with the ultimate goal of teaching a robot to understand the world around
And
themselves,
how
right?
did you get a
And so
hand of
uh,
these models? Did you make them yourselves? Did you acquire like where did you get this information that you were able to work with?
yeah, at the beginning we just were reading research papers. We were reading research papers, and we started forming a team. Obviously, for us, it was very important to get a team that understood machine learning and deep learning and AI as much as they can understand CG and just visual effects in general, because it's very hard to combine the two. At the time, for us, the AI wasn't so mainstream in our industry, right? So if you can call it that now, but um, we really were trying to figure out how do we apply some of these research into the film medium, because a lot of this research was made for different purposes. For instance, a lot of research out of academia for AI motion capture was initially studied for humans' behavior observation, right? To observe how humans move or how we walk, or right. So it wasn't meant for motion
Hmm.
capture. So we really started off by starting off with research, what's in the market, and then we had to really create our models, a lot of them from scratch. We have about 25 ML models in the background of our product.
Mm.
But we always went with the lens of like, how do we apply this for filmmaking? Because it's different when you do that versus when you're applying it for other use cases.
What is the thing? So when you have filmmaking, right? Like obviously this
Hmm.
data is trained on things that exist, right? So that's the whole nature of any kind
Hmm.
of LLM or any kind of ML, right?
Hmm.
So how do you what are you working with in order to sort of do things? Do you create your own material? Is that enough?
Yeah, I think for us, we saw it really as a combination of models that we had to build. Some of our models are just computer vision models, not generative AI
Right.
models, right? What separates us from a lot of other companies, we're not generating pixels or generating art.
Hmm.
What we're doing is we're extracting data out of your shots so you can put it in 3D space. So if you think of a sequence or a shot where you have a performance, so we're capturing your body performance, your facial
Yep.
performance, your lighting, and all of this, right? So for us, it was, when it came to data, we were really relying a lot on synthetic data because we had to extract, we call it observing nature. I have to extract the nature. Where's the light source coming from? Where's the camera
Sure.
movement? How's the camera moving? How's the actor performing? So once we did this, we really had to adapt all the synthetic data to be as film is being shot. We had internally something we always joked as PTA test. Paul Thomas Anderson has this big, Boogie Nights opening
Mm-hmm.
long sequence. A lot of these models would break apart when you really give it film shots, right? When you give them film shots, it struggle to understand. So our models right
Why
now,
did it struggle to
we use
understand? Is
different
it because it
algorithms.
just didn't have those kinds of data?
It didn't have those
Right.
data. Exactly. Yeah. It didn't have the data of like, this is a wide shot, this is a close up. It didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
If a body gets cut in half, where's the rest of the body, right? For instance, for the AI motion capture, right? So, so for us, we really had to build kind of solutions that recognize first what's happening in the
Mm-hmm.
shots. Is this a fast moving shot? Is it a slow moving shot? Is it a full shot or a close up? And depending on these first estimated of the shot, how many people you have in shot? What are they doing? Based on that, we would trigger different algorithms, and different models would train differently. And obviously, there's a lot of kind of secret sauce in between. But I think for us from the day one, even like early 2018, 2019, we approached it from kind of filmmaker lens, because obviously Tye and I both come from film industry. So we really approached it from that aspect.
Well, let's talk a little bit. I mean, obviously you've already gotten into some details about this, but let's do this. What does your product do, and like what is inspiring you, and why did you have to do it? Well, like, what was missing in the market that allowed you to make that happen?
Yeah. So, Wonder Studio, our product, essentially is a web browser solution that is focused on really extracting all the data you need out of the shot to be able to manipulate animation, to be able to get, first initially we were really focused on CG characters, having CG characters in live action shots. But we knew that, this kind of over-promised one-click solution with AI is not a reality. We know that, visual effects and CG is extremely hard. So how we build it is, AI is going to produce you a shot that's, most likely a post-vis or just a thing you can see where AI couldn't handle certain, analysis of that shot. But the main offer that our solution does is it gives you a 3D file, whether it's Maya or Blender file, that has all the elements you would need in a traditional visual effects pipeline, which is your animation data, your camera estimation, your lighting sources, your compositing data. And it gets you about 50-60% there, and then you really can, focus on the creative to push that shot all the way how you want it.
So you basically you take a shot, and then it'll reconstruct the 3D elements you need to render a shot.
Yeah, exactly. We'll take motion capture data for body and face. It would take the camera data.
Camera tracking.
It would take, camera tracking. It would take your light sources to try to estimate where your light sources are coming from. We also get point cloud. We have a lot of other stuff that comes out of it, and essentially puts it in a 3D space, and it produces a clean plate as well. So if you have an actor, obviously the actor doesn't need a mocap suit. We just works out of a regular shot, and then it gives you all those elements, and then obviously it speeds up your process tremendously.
Wow.
As far as traditional visual effects goes.
So okay, so let's pretend like I'm in a shot and I want to basically running down in a parking garage, and I want to make myself a robot, right? So I film the whole thing, and then your tool will basically create the camera, the CG camera, estimate the lighting of that garage, give me all the motion capture data of me running, and give me a clean plate to comp me in. And I do all the CG
an alpha
after
mask
that.
And yeah, exactly. It gives you alpha mask, point cloud, and some other elements as well. But the idea is that it gets you into a 3D software of your choice. So let's say you want to export in Blender or Maya, you would just click, okay, I want a Maya file, and it preps a Maya file with all this information.
Wow.
So that way you kind of already are ready to go and see what didn't work, because there's a million ways to shoot a shot, right? So saying that you can have an AI just one click solve all that is over promise, and it's something that we worked hard against, to communicate with the community in general, that this kind of, I think this recent misconception that AI is just gonna replace everything.
We're gonna well, thank you for saying we are gonna get to that by a long shot. But I think what's really interesting is that all of the things that you just described are things that are a lot of work. It's stuff that I just need to get there before I start doing something fun.
Yeah.
And you're just basically saying it's
Yeah.
a shortcut to start doing that, and then you can do that. Yeah.
Exactly. And you asked me, what was the inspiration? Inspiration originally was obviously Ty and I wanting to make our own
Okay.
films. So we wanted to make kind of sci-fi films, and we realized that technology like this doesn't exist. And, I always say originally we wanted to do it just for ourselves. And then as we started building technology, we realized, okay, this is bigger than us. Let's make it a
Mm-hmm.
platform. But for me, as well as a VFX artist or supervisor, I was so frustrated how many repetitive tasks I would do with each project. It doesn't matter what studio, it doesn't matter who the client is, you always feel like you're starting from
Yep.
scratch and you're doing, it takes you so long to get to the creative part, to creative input,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's, you're considered an artist, but unfortunately, until you get to be an artist, you're doing so many technically challenging steps. And I think that's where I see the beauty of AI is like, let's speed up the process in the things that are not that creative and the things that are rather
Mm-hmm.
monotone. Nobody really likes to do it, and then get to the creative choices quicker.
Right. Right. So that does bring up a thing. Obviously I've been in the visual effects industry for a long time, and those were always those jobs, right? The integration department, the roto department. These are all the intro jobs into visual effects. These are all the things that you learn. Like if you wanted to be a
Correct.
3D guy, you start off in integration and you understand that way. If you want to be a compositor, you start off as
Right.
a roto artist. Now what you're doing is basically saying, okay, those jobs, and they were not fun jobs, right? Necessarily.
Yeah.
But you're taking those jobs and you're like, okay, so you don't necessarily need them. Now, you're also saying that these aren't perfect solutions, but they'll get you mostly there. Is that correct?
100%. And I think that's an important thing to say, especially, I think it's important to say for everybody that's working in AI. It is a kind of hyped market right now
Yes.
where everybody's saying, and there's so much fear coming in industry because of this, because, and I understand the long-term promise is going to be a really big disruption, but it's almost impossible to to guarantee you're going to get perfect results with AI. It's going to figure out everything
Well, what I
automatically.
love about what you
It's
guys are,
it's
I
taking
love what
yeah.
you guys are doing is that you're just putting you right back into your familiar platform of your 3D application, right? You're not saying just make me a robot and then it's a robot and it's not quite the right robot, so you have to type it again. Like it doesn't work.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, we worked hard on that. I think for us, both Ty and I, it's sometimes it's hard, right? Research is
Right.
moving really fast. We really work hard to stay on the ethical side of it because it's a challenging time, especially last
Sure.
year. So, if you look at our platform, you're still creating an asset. The artist is still creating an asset. The filmmaker is still filming your shot. So what our platform does, it will only light and composite as well as your cinematographer shot something. So if you give it a poorly lit iPhone footage versus, your ARRI Alexa professionally lit shot, it will match that compositing and noise and grain. So your iPhone thing will look like AR while your cinematic, and same with the assets. If your robot character is high poly and it's built really well, it will reflect that in your
Interesting.
final render that comes
So
out
it's
of
not
it. So
creating
I
the
think that
assets for
moving
you, right? You
magic.
still have to create your assets.
It's not.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're still traditionally creating your asset. So for instance, Maya, we have a plugin in
Hmm.
Maya. So if you create your asset, you can select with the plugin, export it to Wonder Studio, and then you upload it to Wonder
Okay.
Studio. The beauty is once you upload it, once you have that asset, it's much easier than to use it in all your sequences, and you can operate in a sequence. It doesn't have to be shot by shot
Okay.
as well on the side.
Interesting. And all the rigging and stuff, is that another thing? That would be an
It
amazing
is,
job.
yes.
Like as
I
a
know.
lighter who wants to
Um,
do animation and I can't rig for crap, I would love that.
Honestly, the hardest thing we've seen whenever we're working on creating characters, it's um, there's such a shortage
Oh
of
yeah.
riggers in
Yep.
industry.
And
It's
good
very
ones
hard to
too. Yeah.
find an amazing rigger. Yeah, yeah. We have in-house rigger Juan out of Argentina who's fantastic. And I think obviously there's going to be solutions that will automate a lot of this
Hmm.
process. rigging is a challenge. What we did to try to, we have a bit of that. We have some templates that people can start off, and that plugin can automate a little bit of bone naming and things like this. Things that you need to set up so Wonder Studio can read it
Mm-hmm.
properly. But yes, definitely, I think some of these processes need to be optimized on that side. The reason we went with this approach is also we don't think the shift in industry is going to happen as fast as people think. So most professionals are still creating characters the way we were creating it 2, 3 years ago, right? Or
Right.
more. I do think the kind of content creators, more independent content creators, they can switch a tool much quicker than a studio can,
Sure.
right? Because a studio has a huge process and pipeline in place that you can't switch overnight. You cannot, fix your plane in flight, right? So you're working on a lot of projects, so it's very hard. Big studios cannot just overnight say, okay, we're changing our pipeline. Because you have like 4 movies in production and they're 200 million
Mm-hmm.
each. You just can't risk one day delay, not like 3 months, 6 months
Yeah,
delays,
but
right?
at the same time, I also feel that there's a resurgence of independent filmmakers. People just like what you and Ty want to do, where you guys want to make your own films. You want to do things, and you can do them on a shoestring budget, right? If you look at what the Daniels did when they did Everything Everywhere, right?
Yes.
That is, those are exactly that's your market, right? It's not necessarily the
Yeah.
studios. It's the guy who's like, I gotta make a movie. I don't have time for this.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think that, that was us, and obviously that's who we're inspired. And I do think that's a promise of AI,
Hmm.
right? There's obviously a lot of fear. There's a negative side of AI, but long term, I'm very optimistic because it will do exactly what you said. It's
Sure.
going to create more independent filmmakers and enable people with smaller budgets to create what, only studios could do until now. I just don't think those tools are there yet.
Let's
A lot of AI solutions it's just not there yet, but it will be, in a couple of years.
and I want to talk a little bit about, sort of the shortcomings of the
Hmm.
delusion of what's the hype curve, the delusional time, or whatever, where like all of a
Exactly. I
sudden
know
the
what you're talking
reality of
about.
it's coming crashing down, which you seem very well
Yeah.
tied to in terms of keeping expectations at the right level. But I do want to talk a little bit about the ethics thing. And now, first of all, why
Hmm.
the fact that people have to call things ethical AI is strange. What is your take on this idea that we're calling it ethical? Like, why do we have to call it
Hmm.
ethical?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think it is important subject,
Hmm.
mostly centered around how are you building your
Yeah,
tools, right? What data did you feed in? And I think that's an important one, right? The other one is once the tools are out there, um, you know, using people likeness without people knowing,
hmm,
right? Creating characters that look like real people without consent of real people, or the whole strike what it was about, right? Using extras, scanning them once and then using them in every film as much as you want. That's why I do think the subject of ethical comes because we're going to see a shift from something that takes months, sometimes years, be done in weeks.
okay,
And with that, there's a big change in job titles and how many people you need for
sure.
film, right? So transition is going to happen quick. And unfortunately, like with every technology shift, the good thing is going to create new jobs, but the bad thing, there's going to be disruption. I don't think you can go
For
around that.
sure, 100% true.
Mm.
But um, I want to unpack it. There's two things you brought up, and you brought up some the perfect points, which
Hmm.
are great. One is using
Hmm.
these tools to do things that are nefarious, right? People
Right.
have been talking about using visual effects tools to do nefarious things forever, since the beginning
Right.
of Jurassic Park, right? I mean, and
Right.
like, oh, we just CGI'd whatever this blah blah blah. We'll make a CG version of this character or this actor or this person.
Hmm. Hmm.
When Benjamin Buttons got finally got over the uncanny valley, like, oh wait, we can
Right.
CG a president. I'm sure that question came up.
Right.
That was long before AI. So the ethical question had nothing to do with AI. The only thing that AI did is that it made it somewhat easier for that, right?
And I think why there's this big and funny enough, we get a lot. Like Associate Press will reach out to us often for to check, if something's real or not, because we have a lot of this viral content that comes out with robots playing ping pong
Sure.
or doing some other stuff, and so we'll have to say no, that's made by Wonder Studio. It's not a real
Hmm.
robot. But that happens a
Oh, I'm
lot. You
sure.
you wouldn't believe it. I think that question comes from as you say, Benjamin Button days. You needed a big
Oh yeah,
studio,
it's
you needed a lot of
expensive.
budget to make it look
Right.
real. But now obviously we're putting in hands on a lot of individual
Hmm.
creators. So it's much easier, much quicker to make. So that's why probably that fear comes along. It's like, okay, now it's not just specialized companies, it's also every individual that can
Sure.
do it on that side. I do think um, I don't think that problem is going to get solved. I already see a lot of companies that are building tools that can detect deepfakes, that are building tools that can detect whenever generative AI is used, etc. So I think we'll be able to. I mean, look at community notes on Twitter, right? It's already helping to see like, okay, community said this is not
Yeah.
real, right? On
The
the
amount
side.
of
So I'm
ads
not
and
too
fake
concerned.
posts I see
Yeah.
on social media, the amount of stuff that's so clearly generated is ridiculous.
Yeah. Especially when your algorithm starts seeing that you're paying attention to those,
Yes.
it just feeds you more.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So yeah, I do think it's like with every technology. Technology moves
Sure.
quicker than, what legislations and rules around it and laws around it can catch
Yep.
up, because it's impossible to predict that, right? So I do think we always kind of find a way to balance it out. And there's always that fear of new technology that's always sounding way worse, like every new technology. I mean, if you look at our industry, digital cameras were kind of hated on at
Oh
the
yeah.
beginning, and every cinematographer said, "I will never film with this,"
CG
right? And
was
now
hated on.
everybody's doing it.
And
CG,
it's
yeah,
still hated
yeah.
on.
When CG
Everyone
was
still
the end of
blames
cinema.
CG for everything that's wrong with the film industry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, yeah, it's a little bit of a
Yeah.
pattern, and I think usually it's like a little bit of a defense mechanism as
Sure.
well. We fear new, we fear
Yep.
unknown. Um, this goes a little bit deeper, obviously, because if you look at text to video and other solutions out there, it's a tricky
Mhm.
one. If you can generate Mickey Mouse, you're like, well, how did he learn how to do that? Can I use this IP? Obviously, can I use this IP? Because it's not my IP. So he had to see a lot of images of Mickey Mouse to know how to generate Mickey Mouse. So
Well, technically
I think
speaking, you're
yeah,
perfectly allowed to draw Mickey Mouse. You just can't put it up on the public area, right?
exactly. And depends what Mickey
Right.
Mouse, right? There's the one
That's
that's
public. Yeah.
public domain now,
That's
right?
true. So
So,
so let's unpack that one because that's obviously a big one. So that
mhm,
your source data, right? I mean, there's lots of legislature right now that's being investigated into the sources, this where people are getting their source
mhm,
data. I know that Carla Ortiz is doing some incredible work in terms of figuring out how to get this properly legislated. I'm actually applaud her
mhm,
quite a bit for doing it the correct way, as opposed to just using social media platforms to yell and try to get public opinion about it. Do it legally, right? And she's doing the right job, and very
right.
very excited by that. But with that said, uh, what is your answer when people ask you how are people trained on this? How did it get this information? First of all, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Like how much data do you need to get a good LLM? And where did you get that
Well,
data?
yeah. Well, I think it's important to distinguish what we do. We don't use LLMs, we don't prompt. So
Sure.
we're not
Okay. That's
generating
true. That's
art.
true. Okay.
Yeah.
But you still have a
So the
machine learning. It
separation
still
for
needs to
us.
learn from something, right?
Exactly. And I think that's why for us, there's two different categories. You're generating art
Sure.
using LLMs, you're generating pixels. We're not generating pixels. We're extracting your existing footage. And what we're focused on is, as we say, observing nature. So in that sense, we're observing your movement, we're observing the camera, we're observing light sources. It's your asset that you feed in, it's your footage that you feed in. So that's we did that on
Yeah,
purpose,
but how did you train it? Did you
especially in
train
the
it
early
on your
days.
own footage to do it?
Yeah, no, 100%. So the training for us comes from a lot of motion capture, for
Okay.
instance, data, right? And a lot of motion capture data is people in mocap
Sure.
suits, and then certain camera. And we relied heavily on synthetic data. So lower percentage of our data set is real footage, real images, etc. majority of our data sets is synthetic data that we build
Hmm.
in-house. Because and that's the difference, right? You cannot really use that much synthetic data for LLMs because you need to generate certain objects and certain videos. So you need a lot of videos
Mm.
for that. For what we're doing is we can get away with a lot of synthetic
Mm.
data. So generating synthetic data in-house, you know, synthetic data doesn't. It's if it's focused on movement. Let's talk about movement. We just need the math. We need something called ground truth, right? So you need to know exactly when my shoulder is or exactly where my eye is in that 3D
Hmm.
space, and then you use that to train. And you can in synthetic data you can recreate a lot of different camera moves, a lot of different
Right.
movements, right? So it gives you a lot of option to iterate
So is it kind of like
and
using
produce things.
CG cities to do self-driving cars? Okay,
Exactly, 100% like that. Yes, yes,
gotcha.
yes. That's a good analogy. Very similar concept, if not the same
Mm.
concept, which is you're like, that's why we call it observing
Hmm.
nature because, and we're always transforming these inputs that we
Sure.
have, right? Because we don't need the image, we need the key
Right.
points. Or we don't need the image, we need the noise and grain, so we know how to replicate noise and grain. Or we need the light sources. So synthetic data is kind of ideal because you can package all of that. I can package my animation, I can package camera move, I can package the lighting I want,
Hmm.
and I can package the environment I want,
Sure.
right? On that side. So that helps. But I do think, we had this advantage because we started about 2018, 19. So we've been building our kind of data sets for a long time. And that's why I said that PTA rule was from the day one, kind of having the library of a lot of, a lot of camera moves. Camera framing and camera moves was a big
Mm.
one for what we needed it to work for.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So that's fascinating. I think cameras are, I love cameras because that's how we make movies, right? And so learning how cameras work
Exactly.
is just kind of the most
Mhm.
important thing. And sometimes not paid to, the people don't pay attention to it. They're worried about the 3D world and not about the
Yeah,
camera as much.
yeah, yeah.
So you said it took years, right, to train this stuff and to work on this stuff. How did that
Hmm.
happen? Did you guys just bootstrap it and work on that, or how did you get funding to do this? Like, how did you start as a company?
Yeah, yeah. We started 2016. We really bootstrapped first 3.5 years, both Ty and I, and didn't take the salary. Just a typical startup approach. We just wanted to make sure that we're building something of value. And then, we started with a small team. It was less than 10 of us when we first
Hmm.
started. Alexander Raic, who's our CTO, he really was the genius we brought in early
Hmm.
on, as far as building the MLs. And we've really, the beauty of startups sometimes is, I say, if we go back now, knowing all the problems we have to fix, especially in a research sense, we probably wouldn't even try because it's such a hard problem to solve. But sometimes when you start something, not even realizing how hard it is, you just go blindly
Sure.
and you do it. You're like, I'll figure it out,
Right.
right? And then the problems just keep appearing, and you're like, okay, this is much more complicated than I thought it would
Right.
be. Uh, um,
That's interesting.
but I think for us, yeah, we started like that. We kind of self-funded it the first 3.5 years, and then we went into VC kind of route, like every startup. We went out to raise our seed
How did
round.
that go?
Uh, uh, um, Good. I mean, a good learning process. I think um, there was we got lucky because Founders Fund led our seed round, and Founders Fund is one of the biggest VCs out there, and we had such a good support from them. Um, but it took a while, right, to get to that point. Both Ty and I, this is the first company we ever started. We really didn't know what the fundraise process. We didn't understand, the process or the language and all
Hmm.
that. So we went through this accelerator in Texas called Capital Factory,
Hmm.
where we spent 6 months. They really teach you everything about, starting a startup and fundraise and all of those things. So we really learned as we went. I was fortunate. I had some mentors that been mentoring me for years and helped. One of our first investor, Bob Schwab, who was a personal mentor of mine. Kind of we uh, we had the first demo and we didn't even have proper proper backing or anything. So he's kind of someone that get us going. Yeah, and then that was 2019 when we raised our first seed round, and then 2021 we raised our Series A. led by Horizons Ventures and Epic Games, Samsung, and a few other entities.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. Uh, so let's talk about that whirlwind. Now, 2001,
Hmm.
2000, that time, like suddenly you're on the map, right? People are starting paying attention. The AI buzz is going on, good and bad. Like, how did you navigate those waters?
Interesting enough, we were in stealth mode all the way until
Yeah, I
last
know.
year, until the launch. Yeah, yeah. We were telling people, we were telling people 2020, 2021, we were saying, start learning about AI and visual effects. It's gonna come and it's gonna seem like it came
Mhm,
overnight, but it's not
mhm,
overnight. This research has been happening for decades, right? Especially by like, you know,
mhm,
universities. A lot of research comes from Berkeley, MIT, and other
mhm.
schools that, it's not from yesterday. It's been a while. And as you know, in visual effects, we were using ML for
Decades,
decades now,
decades.
right? Yeah, decades. And so I think we did not want to launch until we had kind of that end-to-end solution. I didn't want to just become a mocap solution. I didn't want to just become a camera tracking solution. The goal was always like, let's build it end to end, so you can really work with these 3D softwares. So that took a while because, as I mentioned, we have 25 ML models. They all have to communicate with each other. There's a lot of happening in the background that a lot of our users don't
Mhm.
realize. There's a lot of data we don't even push out yet
Okay.
because it's not ready, but we still collect that
Mhm,
information because what we're trying to build is, it's much bigger than what we have now. So we approached it kind of like bottoms up approach. We build a foundational technology with the goal to really keep building to get to that full end-to-end
mhm,
solution outside of live action or characters, etc.
mhm.
So I mean, the launch was. I think every time you're doing something so long, uh, I always say I'm a long-term optimist, but short-term pessimist, right?
Sure.
So so even the day before launch, I was like, nah, nobody's gonna like this. We spent 3 years, well, we wasted 4 years. Nobody's gonna like that. And then we created a demo and it just exploded overnight. And everybody in the industry, every studio started reaching out, every filmmaker we know. We did not really predict
Mm.
that. It really came as a surprise. But that's because it's like when you make a film, right? You're watching the edit for so long, you're so long with it, you're working on something for 3 years. You don't really know how people are going to react,
Sure.
right? You don't really know if people are going to like it. So obviously, the timing was also important.
Sure.
I think we went public with it once we launched, when kind of on the peak of that AI and everybody was talking. We always joke like Tye's aunt wrote to him. He's like, "Hey, have you heard of this Chat GPT thing?" We're like, "Okay, this is it. It's like it's mainstream now.
Yes.
This is like
When
late
your aunt is asking
2022."
you about ML tools, yeah.
Exactly. Then you knew, okay,
Yeah.
this is the peak.
Yep.
Um,
That's interesting. So I think it's cool. So just to unpack. So let's say now I want to do
mhm.
exactly what I said. I shot myself running in a parking garage and I want to get my scene. What's the process? I take my video file and I upload it to Window Dynamics
Mhm.
and then I download a Maya scene or whatever.
So yeah, so exactly, we wanted to keep it super simple. I think our premise was, um, you know, we always said like we wanted to allow indie filmmakers to do what big studios can only do. So that was the goal. That's the mission. Still is the core mission of the company. So that being said, we said, okay, that means we need to really make a UI that's extremely simple. So it's very drag and drop. You put your sequence in, you go from that editing step into kind of select actor step, which you click a button and it analyze your footage and say these are all the actors in the
Mhm.
shot. You select your actor and then you drag your character, your CG character. Let's say you already uploaded one, or we have a kind of free characters that we let people use, people that don't have their own
Mhm.
characters. Um, and it's really a drag and drop, and then you select all the data you want out. Like you say, I want Maya file, but I also want a separate file of my animation or separate file of my camera track or alpha mask, etc. On that side.
Yeah.
So I think for us it was very important to give, you get a video straight out of it, but as I say, that video is not a final result. It's just a preview for you to see what worked well, what didn't. The software is really meant to give you those data and elements you need in your DCC.
And it's still just, it's just bipedal data right now, right? So
Yeah, we focus on bipedal. There's a way you can do, obviously, kind of animals and creatures, but you have to perform like them,
sure.
right? So you will just you can assign different bones to different things. So for instance, I can assign my eyes to drive my wings,
Okay.
or
Sure.
my arms, my hands. So you can assign different
Yeah.
things, but you have to perform. If you're standing
Yep.
and it's four legs, the legs will be up here. They won't be on the ground. So you kind of have to
What
crawl.
about other things like let's say cars? Like if you want to track a car and you want to do a bunch of things like that.
Yeah, we don't have that out yet, but that's something we've been looking at for some time
Yeah.
now as well.
Okay.
Mm.
I figured. I know.
Very similar principle, yeah. Very similar
Sure.
principle in this sense, but yes.
Okay. Obviously, this has gotten a lot of information. What about people? How have people reacted to this? They're negatively in some ways, besides just like, how, what, and then how do you respond to some of that negativity?
Yeah, I gotta be honest, we got really like lucky that the community recognized what we're building is not generating art, but it's speeding up the
Sure.
process. And I think community does appreciate that a lot. Because we put a lot of effort in it. Um, I think as far as, obviously there is always
Hmm.
fear, from people. It's like, if I'm an animator, what does this mean for me, right? Um, but there's no difference from standard motion capture, right? Motion capture is not such clean data that you're going to be final and you're so completely happy with
Sure.
it. Yeah, as you know, like cleanup of motion capture data is an animator,
What
field
if you
work,
own a
and
motion
really is the
capture
animator who gets
studio?
the credit.
What if you own motion
Yeah,
capture?
exactly.
What if you're the president of Viacom and you're like, how do you deal with that?
Mm. Yeah, so I think um, the beauty is we've seen usage
Hmm.
globally. We had, I think when we launched, we had close to like 500,000 people that were on a wait list. And uh, we just recently hit a million mark on
Wow.
users. And I think for us, what really excited us is um, we had, small productions all around the world write to us and say, "Hey, I'm so happy I can do this because I always wanted to get in 3D, but we couldn't afford it, or we didn't have the
Hmm.
know-how." And we really see it do kind of like as an entry gate because it's interesting. A lot of users are like, we have a lot of those content creators that never open a 3D software or they don't know VFX terms. And we see it a lot, like with the users, be like, what's a clean plate? And then they start researching and they're like, what's a rigger?
Right.
How do I find one? Like, how do I do this?
Right.
Right. So it is a bit like a entry, a gate to finding out more about VFX process, finding out more about
Right.
CG and just,
So you can say, okay, here
traditional.
you go, and if you want to make it better, hire another rigger, right? If
Exactly.
you want to do this,
So,
okay. Um, all right. Well, let's talk a little bit about obviously, like I said, or like you've been hinting, this has been a huge push in terms of what AI tools is going to do to Hollywood. And what you guys have been
mhm,
approaching is approaching it in very much like by design, a complementary manner to what you guys
mhm,
to the system that already exists. But let's talk about how the rest of these systems are disruptive, right? Or looking
mhm,
things like Luma or Sora or whatever they
mhm,
are looking to completely upend the entire process. How do you feel about
mhm,
that? And how do you feel does that even upend what you guys are even trying to do?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think different use cases. Obviously, one is depending on generating the whole scene. The other one is depending on I'm making something in live action, right?
Sure,
That I want to add the elements. And we're obviously very focused in 3D aspect versus kind of like the AI video is a 2D
sure,
approach, right? On that side. Um, Again, I would say pessimistic short term, but optimistic long
right.
term. I think long term, it will get us towards democratization of content creation, right? That's kind of the promise of AI,
Mm,
which is you don't need to pass a certain, kind of we call it like permission. It's we need permission to tell stories now. Who is you getting permission from? Someone who's going to give you money or give you green light or give you
mm,
distribution. You always need permission. And then what YouTube, for instance, did with distribution, and social media is that we're creating a lot of storytellers now that just don't need a permission. They just have a computer and a camera and they're their own studios,
Yep.
right?
Let
Overnight.
the public
I
decide.
do think that's what's, yeah, exactly. And I do think that's what's going to happen with AI, with production side of things, right? So all of a sudden now you have a production tools that can really do something that you needed a lot of budget
Mhm.
for. So I think long term, it's a good thing. But again, I do think it needs to be built responsibly on the side of like, what are we generating? Are we just stealing other people's art and generating other people's art,
Mhm.
or are we really responsibly building these tools? But I agree with you. I think Pablo is going to decide. I think there's a phrase I always like. It's like, AI is not going to take over your job. Someone using AI will, right? And so I do think it's going to be storytelling. It's going to be extreme. Like, how good can you tell a
Sure.
story? It doesn't matter that you can tell it, but if is your story good? Like, is everything you see on YouTube good? No, right? So it's going to be same here. I think we're just going to give easier access to some filmmakers, that can't afford to move to LA or can't afford, never met a producer. I was one of them. I met my first film producer when I was 20 years old, and I was bothering the poor guy with 1,000 questions. It wasn't even,
Yeah.
he didn't even have the answer for half, but I was so hungry for the knowledge, right?
Sure.
On that side. So I do think that's a good thing. We're going to see it more globally. We're going to see bigger stories, and more risk, right? Because right now the big issue is you're making a film for 200 million. You got to make 400, 500 to break even, right? And so you can't really risk. And I say this repeatedly. I don't know if 2001 Space Odyssey would be greenlit today.
No.
It's too risky of a film.
Oh, so many
Too
films are
artistic,
too
right?
risky right now. Yeah, no one would do it.
So yeah, exactly. So I do think these tools are kind of, we need them. We need to cut down that, cost
Yep.
associated with it, because cost went so much higher in past 30
Hmm.
years, right? Some of it 5x, 10x of how expensive it is to make a
Hmm.
film, right? So I think storytelling should not be tied, to kind of economical, or social kind of status you have, right? It should be free for all. That's a naive way of thinking, but I
I
do believe
absolutely
on
agree,
it.
and I think it's
So
actually been
yeah,
relegated to the privileged for a very, very, very long time. And I think tools,
correct.
tools. If you're putting good tools that are affordable and easy and to use to enable people to take stories, then I can start to see stories coming out of, let's say, the Ivory Coast, right, or Senegal,
Exactly.
or whatever places that
Yeah,
I don't know anything about because they never had the permission to tell their stories, as you were saying, right?
100%.
Um, so
100%.
this is really good. Well, we're coming. So you guys obviously have some big news. You've had an acquisition that's happened recently, right? Tell us a little bit about that and
That's
about
right.
how that's going and where you feel about all of that.
Yeah, so we got acquired recently by Autodesk, which, it wasn't overnight. We've been talking to Diana, Colella, who runs media
Hmm.
entertainment at Autodesk, for a while now. We did a partnership with them last year,
Hmm.
with that Maya integration. We had Autodesk Maya, that plugin that goes into Wonder Studio, and then obviously going back from Wonder Studio into
Hmm.
Maya. So it felt like a natural move to
Sure.
us, because I do think the future will be a bit combination of new tools and the control. That's the problem with Gen AI. We're about to learn filmmaking techniques now with Gen AI, because we're generating. But as you know, making a film is iteration. You're iterating with a team, sometimes 20 passes until you get a final shot, sometimes 50 passes until you get a final shot. And edits are not generic. They go back and forth. Sometimes the director doesn't know what they want, and then you're going to change such small details, right? So I think generative AI still needs to figure out how to do that. This is why we approached it from a standpoint of like, obviously we can't figure out all that. Here's a Maya file. You can edit what you need to the smallest details. So, um, you know, we, this it's been less than a month since the acquisition, so I'm excited. I think our vision was really big, and partnering with a company, that's been, obviously Maya has been a kind of leading tool in our
Sure.
space since the 90s, right? So for us, we're excited, about building with that support behind us, because there's only so much you can do as a startup.
Sure.
So this was one of the things that we were excited
Well,
about.
what about the rest of the tools, right? So there's a lot of tools in the 3D world that are
Hmm.
not Autodesk, right? So how does that affect that? So
Hmm.
like you mentioned Blender, for example, but even like, since you said you're setting up lighting, what about rendering
Right,
solutions and other things like that, right? And compositing.
right. Yeah, and I think this is why there's no
Sure.
change on our end with that. Blender's still going to be part of it and all of it, and so that's something we spoke to Autodesk, during this conversations we had with them. It is important for us to continue that
Hmm.
way. So this is not something that's just going to be, oh, Wonder Studio is now only integrating with Maya. We still build, you keep building, the product's still going to be there. The support to Unreal and Blender and the other ones
Hmm.
remain for us. I think we approach it from like community standpoint, not specific software
Sure.
standpoint, right? So yeah, that was important for me as well, and that's something that we obviously talked to extensively with the team before the acquisition happened.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
Uh,
We cannot remove, especially Blender, that community is pretty big of our users. So if we just came in and say, okay, you can't lose that anymore, it would be a bit of a it wouldn't be a fair
no.
move, especially for our users, right? I personally, as an artist, would be so annoyed on that side of things, right? So
Yeah.
like, what do you mean? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the how people are interested. Like, okay, I want to know more about it. How do I sign up? What's the cost? What is it? How does it all work?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so it's quite simple. You can go to
Hmm.
wonderdynamics.com, and there's a little button there. You can press launch app. So it's a browser solution, so you could use any
Hmm.
browser. And we have three tiers right now. Light tier, which is about $19. Pro tier, it's 99, and then there's an enterprise tier. It's more kind of meant for big studios or bigger
Hmm.
productions on the side. So there's obviously monthly and annually. Annually always give you a bit more. We were, you know, the tough one here always has been is it's on cloud. Running machine learning on cloud is not cheap.
Nope.
25 models on cloud is not
Yeah.
cheap. So that's why, we try to keep these like light kind of entry level content creators, keeping it as cheap as we can. Uh, um, it was a tough decision because sometimes as a startup, you want to give a free tool, but you do the math. You're like, as I mentioned, we had 500,000 signups on a wait list, and then we did the math. We're like, okay, if we make it free, we're gonna be burning millions a month just on cloud costs. So we obviously, as a startup, cannot afford to do
Right.
that on that side. So.
Yeah, and what is that? I mean, obviously, people have to also be worried about their data going on the cloud and all that stuff. How do you manage that?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we have all the. We did this project with Russo brothers before we
Oh, okay.
launched this movie called Electric State. Yeah, so we had to pass through like a very, very
Yep,
rigorous security
for
tests,
sure.
right? On that side, and obviously we're partners with AWS,
Hmm.
so we use AWS, so everything kind of cloud is at the highest level when it comes to security and kind of separating your data, understanding where your data is, uh,
Okay.
and all the things that I think studio. It was good for us because we had to pass the studio test to open it up for public. So we're like, okay, if we pass this test, if we pass the Russo brother test, I think we're pretty safe to go
Yeah.
on the
Well,
fastest.
how big are you? You mentioned you were coming back from Europe, right? So you said you have an office there. So how big are you guys now? I mean, it was just the two of you guys and a couple of developers. I'm sure it's much bigger at this solution, right?
Yeah, we're close to 70 people right now. So we grew quite a bit. Yeah.
What's that like being a
Yeah.
founder of a company with 70 people all of a sudden?
Well, now we're in a company that has 10,000
Oh
employees, so
yeah,
it's
now
very
you are.
different.
Yeah.
70, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. 70 seemed big to me a month and a half ago, but now it seems like a tiny
Yeah.
team, right? When you go in a big corporation. No, I think um, probably like the best number is like around
Hmm.
20, because then you still have an extremely personal relationship with
Hmm.
everybody. When you come to 70, we still are a very, very, very tight team, but definitely communication, avoiding silos gets
Hmm.
hard. Because we have four different departments. So for us, it's ML, CG, soft dev. So a lot of different departments. and you got to make sure they don't become too
Mm.
independent, because then you're building one thing but you're not communicating, you're building it separately. So I think it's like everything, you know, communication is obviously the key always. I think the more people you have, the communication, being really organized in like a tight
Sure.
ship. um
Sure.
you know
Well, that sounds amazing. So listen, we're coming in about an hour. I really appreciate your time of what you're doing. We're looking forward to seeing what you guys are doing next. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of discussions about ML in terms of how it's going to affect the visual effects industry, and your company is going to be definitely very much part of that conversation at this point, right? So cool. Well, thank you so
no
much, Nicola. I
thank
really
you.
appreciate this conversation.
No, no, likewise. Thank you. I hope I didn't bore your listeners
Oh,
too
I
much.
don't think so. I'm pretty sure that's not
No,
Fedora.
thank
Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. I think it's great what you're doing. I've obviously listened to your podcast before, and some people you have. I think that transfer of knowledge you try to do is very important. Sometimes in our industry, coming from a tech space and film space, I see transfer of knowledge in tech industry being much more open than in the film industry. We noticed that, tech industry, you have the open source initiative, you have people really sharing what they learn. Filmmakers sometimes tend to keep their knowledge really close to the
Hmm.
heart, and you know this. So I think you know platforms like yours are very important. I mean, going back to the beginning, I learned because a kid named Andrew Kramer wanted to put all the tutorials online for people, and I was able to learn, right? So I think that's very important for an industry to keep that transfer of knowledge
Well,
going.
that's great, and I really appreciate you saying that about the podcast. And I think it's very important. You're very right. As to paying it forward is the important thing, and it sounds like you guys are doing the same thing as well. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure talking to you.